Everyone, I'm here today to talk to you guys about the kind of strange, kind of creepy, kind of gross death of Joshua Maddux. I have a lot of theories that I'd love to go over with you guys, some that involve foul play, some that involve just a plain accident, and these are some theories that I have seen online, and then some of them I actually haven't seen online. So I'm really excited to talk to you guys about those, but before I get into it, I just want to say if you're new to my channel, then welcome, and if you're a returning subscriber, then an extra special welcome to you. Thank you so much for supporting my channel. I really appreciate it. And if you're watching this and you haven't subscribed, then please hit that red subscribe button down below to support me and my channel. And let's go ahead and get into this strange case of Joshua Maddux. I am absolutely sickened, but I am curious nonetheless. Let's learn more. Joshua Maddux was born on March 9th, 1990, and he was the youngest of 4 children. He and his family lived in Woodland Park, Colorado. I've never been, but I've heard that it's very gorgeous and there's lots of wilderness and hiking. Like I said, he was the youngest child in the family, and he had 2 sisters. Their names were Catherine and Ruth, and he also had an older brother named Zachary. Josh was 6 feet tall and 150 pounds, so he was kind of like a string bean body type. He was pretty thin, and he wasn't into sports. He was actually more of a creative type. He was described as a free spirit who really enjoyed going on walks through the woods, writing in his journal, and listening to music. He was definitely more of like the sensitive type. And, you know, a lot of people who are funny because they don't want those around them to be sad. And his class clown attitude may have stemmed from an incident that occurred on June 1st, 2006. Just a week before his graduation, Josh's older brother, Zachary, took his own life. And this came as a shock to Josh as well as the rest of the family, because Zachary was just one of those people where you really thought that he had his shit together. He didn't really seem to be depressed at all. So everyone was really affected by this. And Josh actually was homeschooled for 2 years, and I think it might be because of this incident. I know that a lot of the times when a family member takes their life, the kids will be homeschooled because the parents become worried about like a bullying situation in their high school. But eventually Josh was enrolled in Woodland High School. After Zachary's death, Josh spent a lot more time alone, and he liked to just kind of be alone with his thoughts and with nature. So he would often go on these long walks where he would come back feeling a lot more peace of mind. That's why his sister thought nothing of it when Josh told her that he was going on a walk. This was May 8th, 2008. Josh never returned from this walk. And as it became dark, the family became worried, wondering where he was because it was getting cold outside. However, knowing that Josh was a free spirit, the family thought it was odd, but they thought it was really possible too that he ran away. 5 days later, Josh's dad makes the decision to call the police to report Josh as a missing person. Josh is 18 years old at this point, and since he had the reputation of being a free spirit, that was really kind of hindering the investigation because there were no signs of foul play, there were no signs that he wanted to hurt himself, and no one suspected that like maybe he was injured somewhere. So the police really didn't do much in regards to finding Josh. The family goes years not knowing where he is, and they search for him, but to no avail. A really sad detail in this case is that Josh's dad keeps the family home even after everyone moves away, so that Josh could potentially have somewhere to come back to if he ever did decide to return. But little did he know, Josh was already dead. I put on a jacket because I got cold. In August 2015, the owner of a cabin that was located just 2 blocks from the Maddux home made an extremely grisly discovery. He was in the process of demolishing this cabin when he came across the dead body of 18-year-old Josh Maddux. He was in the process of, tearing it down, and he noticed a foul odor that was coming from the chimney area. Thinking that it was just an animal that crawled in there and died, he was shocked to discover that it was a human body. The owner of this cabin is named Chuck Murphy, and he actually inherited this cabin because it was originally bought by his parents back in the Prohibition era, and then he came to be the owner in the 1950s. He didn't live in this cabin. It was kind of just like a second property that he owned, and Chuck's brother actually lived in the cabin until 2005. He moved out and it basically just became a storage facility and kind of fell into disrepair. They always had a problem with animals getting in there and making nests, and it always had this really weird smell. So eventually it just became too much for this 80-year-old man to own, and they decided to knock it down. But then they find the dead body inside, and they're absolutely horrified that some corpse was laying in there for years while he just, walked in and did brief inspections of the property just to make sure that no squatters were in there. And he had been doing this for several years, having no idea that Josh's body was in the chimney. He calls the police, who arrive along with the county coroner, and they examine Josh's body. They find that the body is laying in the fetal position with the knees positioned above the head. And the way they're describing this, I'm pretty sure that Josh was kind of like on his back with his knees like up to like his chest head area. They used dental records to positively identify the body as that of Joshua Maddux. This whole time, he was less than a mile away from his home. Al Bourne is the local coroner who conducted Josh's autopsy, which he described as very difficult given the state of decay. He didn't find any evidence of drugs in Josh's system, and he also says that the hard tissue showed no signs of trauma. There were no broken bones, no knife marks, no gunshot wounds. So it was a very, very confusing case. Later that month, in August 2015, the coroner eventually came to the conclusion that Josh's death was an accident. He said that he either died of hypothermia or of dehydration, basically whichever one got to him first, because he was likely in that chimney for 1 to 2 days. The chimney didn't have any houses that were like directly surrounding it, so nobody would have heard Josh's screams for help, and the temperatures that night dropped to below 0. So he, was there for a period of time and then eventually just succumbed to the situation. The coroner thought that maybe Josh was on the roof of the cabin and he jumped down into the chimney to get into the cabin, but little did he know there was actually a countertop that had been shoved against the front of the fireplace, which basically meant that Josh was like jumping down into a hole where he wouldn't be able to escape from. Because he wasn't strong enough to position himself and claw his way out of the chimney, he became stuck down there where he eventually died. But there are several things that don't really make sense about this conclusion. One of which is the fact that Chuck, the owner of the cabin, insists that getting down into the chimney from the top would be impossible because he had installed a mesh grate over the top. Like I mentioned earlier, they were having issues with animals getting into the cabin, so he installed a mesh grate over the top of the chimney so that they wouldn't be able to enter that way. Another creepy fact about this case is that Josh was naked from the waist down. When they found his body, all he was wearing was a thermal shirt. His jeans and underwear were found rolled up inside the cabin along with his shoes. So that would mean that he would have to be inside the cabin at some point and then take off half of his clothes and then go outside to the roof naked from the waist down, dick out, and then jump down into the chimney, which just really doesn't make sense to most people who hear about this case. So if he was inside the cabin to put his clothes there, he would also be aware that there was a counter blocking the entrance into the fireplace. And therefore, wouldn't he have like the common sense not to jump down into the chimney? Like, that's just really odd to me. And then another reason why I find the fact that he's naked from the waist down extremely sketchy is that a lot of the time when they find victims of SA, you know, when somebody does something sexual to you that you didn't want them to do, a lot of the time when they find the bodies in these cases, they're naked from the waist down. This is just really eerily similar to the same MO that you find in SA cases. Sorry, I'm using a lot of abbreviations here. And you know, men can get assaulted. It's a lot less common. It's more of like an issue that's affecting women, but it does happen to men. And since it is currently Sexual Assault Awareness Month, I wanted to include that detail and say that it is absolutely a possibility. Basically, the only way that the accident theory would really make sense is if Josh didn't have the counter in front of the fireplace at that point when he crawled in there, but then like, why would he get stuck? I'm not really sure what the dimensions of the chimney were, because maybe he was stuck like that firmly that he wasn't able to move at all, which is really scary because that would be so uncomfortable to be stuck in that position for 1 to 2 days. Because maybe like Chuck at one point noticed the foul smell during one of his, you know, surveys of the cabin, and then he moved the breakfast bar countertop sort of thing in front of the fireplace. And he just didn't look inside to see what was the foul smell. He just moved the fireplace or moved the countertop in front of it. But Josh's body had been very well concealed for 7 years. Chuck had visited the cabin prior to discovering Josh's body, but he always attributed the foul smell to the lack of upkeep and the dead animals that were potentially inside. He never thought that, you know, a human body was inside of this cabin. And I was thinking that maybe he pushed the countertop into the front of the fireplace to try to stop animals further from getting in, and he just didn't look inside the fireplace. I'm not 100% sure where Josh's body was in like a height perspective of how tall the chimney was, because I'm gonna guess that the chimney was like 15 feet tall max. And I doubt that Chuck, you know, would like look up into the chimney before he pushes the countertop in front of it. But he basically didn't ever realize that, you know, anything was out of the ordinary with his cabin. Josh was a likable person and he wasn't super into drugs. Like, he did, you know, smoke weed. He was kind of like a high school stoner type a little bit. But he didn't really have any enemies. He was a really popular kid at school. So who would murder him? My first theory would be that he fell victim to a random murderer who saw this teenage boy walking around in the woods and decided to take advantage of it. Chuck believes that 2 people would have had to shove his body into the chimney based on the way it was positioned. So maybe there were 2 murderers and it was just a crime of opportunity. There's really only one suspect in this case, and it's somebody who wasn't a stranger to Josh. This man's name was Andrew Newman, and he went to Woodland High School, and he was in the same class as Josh. Around the time that Josh went missing, Andrew had been walking around telling people that he and Josh were going to go on a trip to New Mexico after graduation. A lot of people online describe Andrew as being a weirdo. Not that many people wanted to hang out with him, but Josh, being so friendly, he was the kind of person that would hang out with a class weirdo. So they would hang out together, smoke weed. A lot of people online were saying that Andrew was into a lot more intense drugs than weed. So maybe if Josh was leaving to go hang out with Andrew, he didn't want to reveal to his sister that he was using drugs, whether it was weed or something more serious. So he just told his sister that he was going on a walk and then kind of insinuated that he'd be alone on this walk. A lot of the information you read about Andrew Newman in relation to this case is basically from Reddit, so it's not the best source, so take everything that I'm going to say about Andrew Newman with a grain of salt. Andrew, after graduation, became a nomad, and at the age of 21, he was arrested for the stabbing death of a man in a wheelchair. How fucked up do you have to be to stab somebody who's in a wheelchair? When he was arrested, he also admitted to the murder of a woman who lived in Taos, New Mexico, and he said that he stuffed her body into a barrel. The police had fingerprint evidence for the situation with the man in the wheelchair. Also, somebody had witnessed them being together right before the murder happened. So this was a pretty open and shut case. However, the situation with the woman in the barrel in Taos was really weird because they had already made an arrest in that case, and they said that the case was already on its way to being closed, and they felt like the other person was more of a suspect. So Andrew was just like yanking their chain basically, which is really weird. But I think that sounds a lot like Josh's case, killing somebody and then pushing them into a concealed area to help hide the body. Andrew Newman had been traced to multiple crimes in 6 states. There was just that one murder of the man in the wheelchair, and the other ones were more on the robbery side of things. And in none of these robberies was there enough evidence for them to fully convict Andrew for them. So he's just serving time in jail for the one murder. But, you know, that's already going to be an extremely long sentence, if not life in prison. People around Josh's high school say that Andrew bragged about, quote, putting Josh in a hole. Hence that whole thing I was saying, hole, no pun intended. Hence what I was saying about Josh jumping down into the chimney that had basically become a hole because the fireplace was completely covered. So maybe Andrew purposefully killed Josh and then shoved his body into the fireplace and covered it with the counter so then nobody would see it. Or maybe he even talked Josh into getting into the fireplace and then moved the breakfast bar / counter, sort of giant piece of furniture, in front of it, thus trapping Josh. The fact alone that Josh is dead and he went to school with somebody who was later convicted of murder should be evidence enough that the police need to reopen this case and look into Andrew Newman as the culprit. I don't know why they haven't already. I think it just might be one of those situations of like a small town police force that's not really competent. Now, this leads us to my final theory, and this is actually one that I'm really excited to hear y'all's opinions on because I think it's extremely likely. And this theory is that the property owner, Chuck Murphy, made all this shit up so that he could avoid a liability lawsuit. You can sue somebody if their negligence contributed to the death of a loved one. So the fact that Chuck owned this property meant that he was completely liable for anything that happened inside of it. And the fact that he had blocked off the fireplace would definitely mean that he was negligent and that Josh basically died because of his actions. Chuck insisted that the grate had been over the top of the fireplace and that it would be, quote, impossible, that's the exact word that Chuck said, it was impossible for someone to climb through the top of this chimney. However, the police officers and the coroner, who were the first responders for the discovery of Josh's dead body, said that there are no crime scene photos that feature a grate at the top of the chimney. Because the cabin had been under construction at the time, the grate had supposedly already been taken off and then like thrown into like the trash, and it was basically impossible to find. Everything having to do with the fact that Josh could have fallen victim to foul play has to do with the fact that it was impossible to enter the top of this chimney. But with no grate being present, basically the only proof that the top of the chimney was covered at all is Chuck's word. And he definitely has millions of dollars to lose if there ever was a negligence lawsuit pursued against him. Because they had problems with the animals getting into the cabin, maybe Chuck decided to take the countertop, breakfast bar, large piece of furniture, and then move it to be in front of the fireplace. So then it would further block animals from being able to get from the top of the chimney out into the cabin. And that could also be seen as negligence. You could definitely argue that in court, Chuck had the burden of taking care of people that could potentially enter his cabin. And by placing an obstruction in front of the fireplace, he then inadvertently, of course, trapped Josh in the fireplace. When you're suing somebody for a wrongful death like Josh is, it's not the fact that somebody meant to kill Josh, it's that there was an accident that occurred due to the actions of somebody else, and that would be Chuck in this case. Chuck was 80 years old when Josh's body was discovered, so I doubt he's still alive and that we can question him about this. But one fact that I do find kind of odd about this theory is the fact that Chuck remained involved in this case. If he felt guilty in any way, he could just take a step back and not be involved any further. But he keeps inserting himself and insisting that foul play was involved. So that's all the information I have for you guys on the sketchy death of Joshua Maddux. I would love to hear your opinions on this case. Do you think that this was an accident, or does the fact that he was missing the bottom half of his clothes indicate that there was foul play here? I think Andrew Newman sounds extremely sketchy. He has proven that he's capable of intentional homicide. So I definitely think that he should be looked into more. I think that Josh's family deserves closure. His sisters are now married with kids, but they're still wondering what happened to their little brother. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by giving me a thumbs up and leaving a comment down below. I love reading your opinions on the cases, and I think this one could generate a lot of interesting discussion because I feel like it could be any of those three theories that I talked about. Well, that is all from me today. If you haven't already, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below. And until next video, I hope you guys all have a wonderful day and stay safe.